Hello everybody. Thanks for joining me on my little walkabout here. So I've been thinking more since the last walk that I had where I was talking about, that it seems to be like a good idea, the most ideal thing that God or the ultimate ground or whatever it is, whatever word we want to use for that thing that you can point to but can't ultimately be said, that it seems really important to me that it be ineffable, that it be in some way unknowable, like beyond being, right? And then I started thinking about because I think it just seems like a good idea that if whatever the hell is the source from which, out of which, at the bottom, above being, let's say, right? If that, it just seems good that be something that cannot be grasped by me, right? Seems just good. And I've been thinking about, well, why is that good? Why does that seem so necessarily good, right? Like in some sense, obviously good. At least to me. And then I think it hit me that it's precisely the ineffability of the source of being, right? Of God, right? The ultimate, the beyondness, unknowableness, in the ultimate sense. That's the reason why I think that that's good is also exactly what happened to the West is not that. Precisely what made the West kind of possible in some sense was this historical, gradual unfolding over time of the understanding of being started to take a very different shape than that, where being, I think it's, first articulated like with Plotinus, which calls it the one. Actually, Plato is the first one to talk about it as the one, but the one being beyond being, right? As the ultimate ground and source from which all beings, even being itself, receives its determination, right? It's non-being, it's being, right? All of it, the not, the is, all of it, the ground of intelligibility. With somewhere in the Middle Ages, in scholasticism, you start to see these arguments for the proof of God, right? Where, and I don't know the history enough to at all be confident in my accuracy here, so take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt, but, essentially believe as Christianity started to really kind of take hold into the world, it needed to justify itself, right, to essentially kind of a Greco-Roman truth sense, right? And so, and given the people's lives were at stake, it became really important that you have these Christian apologists who basically start to have to put the belief in God in terms of kind of logic and reason and rationale, right? And so I would imagine that's kind of where it starts. And as that continued, you started to get, God became that which was the necessary entity, right, for anything to exist, right? But it was proved. In other words, it was a certainty that God existed. And here's why: because it's presupposed in everything. Here's the mathematical logic of that and the calculation of that. And then you get these, scholastic theologians, metaphysicists, having these rational arguments, these really intense rational debates and arguments around shoring up the power and the certainty of God, right? But you could only be certain about something, right? Especially since, and this, it really, Descartes said it, but this is building for a long time, that the measure for knowledge started to become certainty. Thus, I doubt everything. That's Descartes. I think, therefore I am. I cannot doubt that I'm thinking. Therefore, the method to know what is true is to have this incredible doubt that if I can be convinced in the face of all doubts, we could know for certain that that's true, right? And so in that momentum, in this way, the existence and the reality of God started to become the God of the philosophers, right? Where God subtly and slowly started to be a being, right? Maybe it was being itself, but he started to become a being. And then, as Heidegger, and once God has being, right, then he's now under all the speculations of that very logic, and that has so much to do with science and with atheism and the undoing of the church, right? So many ways, and essentially the nihilism that I think that we all dwell in, whether or not we believe in God, consider ourselves spiritual, like whether or not you're the Pope, that we all are, we can't not be fundamentally of a time that is a secular time in which its underlying intelligibility has gone away into a assumed, unnoticed nihilism, unquestioned nihilism, right? So I was like, oh, well, because that's what happens. That's why it needs to be best if God could not, my grasping it couldn't, my grasp couldn't survive it, right? Like, I can't get under it, I can't behold it, I can't take advantage of it, I can't know of it like an object. But it's that which is beyond all of that, right? And I think what started to happen too is where in the beginning, especially in the early Christianity, right, you really get this sense that it has so much to do with the presence, right, of God. Like this sense of, not like the metaphysical truth of God's existence, right, but the actual living presence the felt presence that one of God, right? And that is underlies and one communes in, right? One lives their life in relationship with, this kind of sense of the luminous within all things, right? That structures all of our architecture, our intelligibility, the way we treat each other, what we see as right and wrong, all of this, right, is really of the sense of the sacred and the holy being an actual presence, right? And that's the thing that's important. And I would venture to say that, like, where human beings, and I'm definitely the case, right? It's a very special state to be in a speculative position, thinking about such things philosophically, right? Even for the philosopher, most of the time, they're not in like an observant, speculative position, pondering their life, right? It's a real special state, or an exceptional state. Most of the time, we're, as Heidegger would say, we are dwelling, embedded in the world, in living into and out of possibilities, right? And out of care, right? And in that participation is where the sense of actual presence comes from and is realized. In this way that you just simply can't get to by thinking about it, right? In a like a strictly dry logical way. I think that there are ways of thinking philosophically that actually realize that presence. So that's why, and so in other words, it's the presence of our lives and the presence of the people in our lives and the presence of time and the situation and the presence of my family and the presence of my job and the circumstances and the breath going in and out of my left nostril and the sound of the felt sound of the leaves underneath my feet as I walk, right? It's this participation in presence that is that which is most real to us. And thus meaningful, right? It's like, in other words, it's where we live. So, if on some level the West is simply, or you could say, the takeover of techne, right? Which essentially I view as just basically, it's synonymous, it's a technical word for the takeover of nihilism. Where the world, when you don't have a fundamental ground in the ineffability of the ground of that which you dwell in as presence, right? When that loses its ground and becomes that which is calculable, right? All of a sudden, what we participate in becomes very empty, becomes hollow. And then all we have is not what that which we see and feel, taste, touch, and experience as the analogic revelation of a sense of moreness that is beyond anything that we can comprehend in its suchness, right? That we can find ourselves in gratitude and reverence for, in love with, caring for. Instead, the West, as you could say, is almost defined by the loss of that, and that where everything starts to be seen as a point of calculation, as a resource that can be optimized for our consumption, our use, even our spirituality, right? Like this notion of like apps and meditation apps and all that stuff, right? Even that, everything, if you notice that, like everything has kind of come underneath this enframedness, and we no longer have a dwell in the presence of something sacred, right? That's beyond us. Instead, we are in a frame that speaks to us already as a resource to utilize. So much so that we don't even expect it to be otherwise. That's the danger. That's how it disappears. So, that's why it seems like it'd be a good idea. It just would be good if there was actually something in the universe that could not be optimized, that couldn't be a resource, could not be exploited, right? Mastered, calculated. And if there was that, and what that was, that could not be a resource, could not be grabbed hold of by me or grasped by me, of use to me. And that was that which was the source of everything that could be useful to me, right? Now I can actually, with that, the street, the light, the sound of my voice, the sense of speaking, the imagination I have of you listening to me, the very listening itself, the turn I just made on this walk, this neighborhood, could actually be a presence that by its nature presupposes and reveals what is beyond this neighborhood, what is beyond me, yet is in likeliness, is an analogy with. That's why.